Welcome to the Disruptance Podcast. The Disruptance Podcast is the show that disrupts the way entrepreneurs think to make them more profitable and impactful. Rethink tired and outdated business norms to welcome innovation and unlock your unlimited possibilities. Here are your hosts, Eric Forney and Greg Fowler.
Eric, super excited about this episode here. Timely manner as far as it's said that way. And I do want to stipulate for anybody who is tuning into this right now, it is Sunday, November 26th, 2023. So just in case if they're referencing this a year or two from now, you have a time stamp for it. Because these topics of conversation aren't always evergreen, Eric. But for this instance, we want to address the elephant in the room. Into the industry, which is the real estate related lawsuits. But I want to kind of set the stage with a few highlights as far as Google is concerned. So if you want to type in to Google today's real estate lawsuits into the search, here are some of the headlines that you might come across.
Okay, I've not gone through this exercise, so I'm sure that you're going to trigger me already. Let's go. Let's do it.
I'm hoping so, Eric. I want to set it up because I know that you're going to drop some bombs, and this is really great. So the latest real estate commission lawsuit is the scariest of all. So that's the first one from Housing Wire. Let's see what they say here. Americans are taxed $60 billion in real estate commissions. Fortune. The next one is, what is the $2 billion realtor lawsuit meaning for home buyers? U.S. News. Let's read this one. NPR $1.8 billion lawsuit could upend the real estate industry. The list goes on and on and on. Wall Street Journal, New York Times. I mean, this is ridiculous. But Eric, I want to dive into this because.
So basically, all of the articles basically predict the future, the collapse of the real estate sales industry. Is that what it is?
Exactly. You say collapse. Okay, Business Insider. Listen to this: a $1.8 billion earthquake just hit the real estate industry.
Got it.
You're hearing this. You're hearing this here first. So let people read these things, or maybe not. Listen to what Eric got to say about this. Eric, I really want to dive into it. Your hands on, your finger is so on the pulse, it's not even funny. Quite frankly, I'm sick of hearing everything that's going around this way. And I would love your true professional perspective, and not just to be clickbait, because as far as I'm concerned, that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
So where's your head at? Where do you want to go when we talk about the real estate?
My first thought with this is my disclaimer and my disclosure. So I am a Keller Williams employee. This is not a Keller Williams endorsed, backed, supported, licensed, reviewed, approved opinion, any of those disclaimers. So I just need to give that context, though, and because understand that Keller Williams was one of the defendants in the lawsuit. And so any commentary that I add to it, of course, I want to make sure that everyone's aware they're fully my own opinions, Greg. And to your point that, I do have some perspective on it. And it is potentially a little bit more unique than what Business Insider has. Business Insider known for their TMZ-like perspectives on most things, headlines, and on most things, news and air quotes. And so I completely understand. The question that comes to my mind then, let's just pretend that I woke up from a coma and I fell into earth all of a sudden and I stumbled upon this earthquake, Greg, and the earthquake that's coming for the real estate industry. I just stumbled on it after my coma. And what I want to know now is, so real estate agents, they get wiped out from this planet Earth. What is it Business Insider and the rest of these know-nothing pundits recommend? Mm-hmm. That the consumer does this for sale by owner, this for buy buyer process. What is the actual recommendation? Is it the consumer goes unrepresented? That's the That's the kind of the thought I have first in hearing the headlines.
Yeah.
If we believe that the consumer would choose to do it on their own without any representation, without any guidance, without anyone advocating for their best interest, great. Knock yourself out. You can go down the belief of that, just like the founders of forsalebyowner.com, Craigslist, and buyowner.com, and any of the other FISBO grifting websites have done, in which I just like to point out that 3 of the largest for sale by owner websites used real estate agents to sell their home.
Mm.
The Craigslist founder has used real estate agents to buy and sell multiple times over. In fact, the attorney who sued the real estate industry used real estate agents to buy and sell real estate because he's qualified legally. He's capable from the ability to compute, the ability to triangulate information, the ability to sign and read his own legal documents, the ability to notarize, and the ability to formalize his contracts. And yet he still opted to hire and pay a real estate agent. So where the hell is the earthquake, Greg? That's what I want to know. What is the actual earthquake itself?
I would really like to have more understanding into that too, Eric. And that's why I'm glad we're having this conversation. I know that anybody that's tuning into this, that they've heard it, they've seen it, the naysayers, the hearsay, so many different social media postings and articles that are written by quote unquote professional organizations. I mean, Eric, the way that this is, I guess, broken down is, and I would love to get the perspective, obviously for takeaways for a couple different things. The consumer, right?
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like, and what do they actually want? I think the thought processes of agents. So the individual producers that are tuning into this right now, what schools of thoughts are there? There's really kind of 2 ways. And then as the agents really get the accurate level and they're educating themselves in a different light, besides just reading headlines here, what do they spread to their team, their colleagues, but more importantly, to direct to the consumer? So I would love to kind of get that. And then any future scenarios, future casting. So Eric, let's just knock it out. Whatever order you want to take it in, but I think that'd be a good takeaway for everybody.
So let's chunk this down into potential scenarios. First, we'll give a backstory for anyone who, my mom, who happens to be just an avid listener, Greg. She hasn't gone out and been reading Business Insider and the Wall Street Journal. She's opting not to waste her money every month on subscribing to those publications. And so, for those that are unaware of the backstory of this. In the state of Missouri, there was a small jury who after hearing testimony, claimed that there was a conspiracy to collude and price fix on the commission rates that were offered to buyer agents.
Okay.
And therefore, as a result, they decided that as a direct byproduct of this conspiracy of collusion, that sellers in the state of Missouri had been harmed some sizable amount of money to the tune of $5.4 billion. $5.4 billion sellers had been harmed in the state of Missouri as a byproduct of this conspiracy of collusion around price fixing. Okay. Now, to my knowledge, there was no evidence presented of an actual conspiracy. There was no evidence of collusion. In fact, the attorney who tried for the plaintiffs indicated that the conspiracy was so demonstrative and it was so brazen that they conspired in public. So real estate agents were so brazen and had so much bravado that we were willing to conspire publicly. In fact, because you could actually see commissions in public today. And so because of that, it must mean that that we all were conspiring to somehow fix prices, and yet we did it publicly. Nonetheless, we don't even need to go down the road around how, your medical benefits are similarly arrived at. Oddly enough, class action suits attorneys seem to arrive at similar clustering of pricing. And it seems like when you call around to mechanics, they also seem to cluster around an industry rate of pricing, and roofers seem to cluster around pricing for insurance companies. But let's throw game theory and the dynamics of microeconomics 101 out the window, and let's focus now on potential paths. So let's pretend that the real estate agents that they price fixed. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
let's pretend that 60-year-old Sally, who happens to be the typical real estate agent, by the way, the typical real estate agent is a 60-year-old woman as of this year. And so the 60-year-old woman who was likely your gym teacher or previously your health teacher, or she was your librarian, Greg, she is now your real estate agent. Okay. And you know, Sally, she can't be trusted. So she's out price fixing and she's conspiring. And, you know, so Sally goes out and she's been conspiring, and along comes this jury in Missouri, and they decide that Sally can no longer do business the way she's been doing it. It's now illegal. Well, Sally's got a few options, and the real estate industry has a few options of how things can go. Let's first start at kind of like ground level 101, which would be the consumer can represent themselves in perpetuity. Sure. Right? You could just disband. The Department of Justice could come along and they could say, you know what? We've decided all real estate agents are bad. They all conspire. They all break the law. All you Sallys need to go home and find another job. Most of you are unfit to be employed doing something else, but you need to go find a new job. Okay, interesting. So that would mean buyers are unrepresented, sellers remain unrepresented. Okay, right. So it's the equivalent of trying to transact on the Facebook marketplace. If you've ever done that, it's the equivalent of like the STDs of shopping, you know, like you just never know what you're actually going to get. No one really discloses the full truth of what kind of blemishes they're carrying around when they list those articles on the marketplace. And so the base level is the Facebook marketplace. Everyone assumes their own risk. Now, what are the consequences?
And Eric, it's not an if, it's just a when.
Oh yeah, for sure. So it's just a numbers game. You know, you're going to get an item with several blemishes. Again, it's the marketplace. It's Craigslist, right? And so the challenge with that is that what we know would happen is that all of a sudden the legal industry would see this huge influx of buyers and sellers who because they don't understand what constitutes fraud or what constitutes good faith or due diligence, you would see this huge influx of litigation. How do we know that would happen? Because much of the global real estate industry works that way, where there's an unrepresented party in a transaction. And what do we know happens? Well, there's a significant prevalence of litigation as a byproduct. We also just have to look at other industries where there's no representation to see that the government has historically found that to be a bad idea. In fact, what you can't do is you can't be a financier, or you can't go and raise money from unaccredited investors. What are accredited investors? They're people who make above a minimum amount of money each year or have a minimum threshold of net worth. Why? Because when they lose money on their investments, it's not going to wipe them out. Right. Now, if someone had a $10,000 net worth and a $30,000 annualized income, investing that $10,000 might be like playing the lottery. Mm-hmm. Right. And so the government just so happens to also regulate the lottery for a reason, and that's to avoid people being taken advantage of who are already disadvantaged. So it's highly unlikely that tomorrow, with the wave of a magic wand, that Washington, D.C. comes along and says, you're going to all go unrepresented. Okay, so that's the STDs of the marketplace, the Facebook approach of buyers and sellers on their own.
Maybe that's door number one.
Yeah, door number one is that.
In a game show, that's door number one for the industry. So Eric,
that's not going to.
What's behind door number two?
Door number two. Okay, so you've got the opposite, where you have kind of what amounts to be half of door number one, which is buyers are unrepresented.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So today, buyers are obviously, for the most part, largely represented, and the sellers have their own representation. Buyers have their own representation. In which case, then each party advocates for their own party's best interest. It's similar to if you're going into a divorce court, each party has their own attorney. It's typically a more sensible approach. If we did away with buyer's agents, it'd be the equivalent of going into the court for divorce and one party having an attorney, the other opting to represent themselves. Typically, the court is not a fan of that. for a number of reasons. And that's because most of the time they would claim that the unrepresented party is at a disadvantage. And thankfully, the U.S. judicial system largely likes to try to have the most equal footing of all parties when making material decisions like purchasing or selling a home.
Sure.
And so it's quite possible that that there would be some sort of change that would cause the way that money is distributed.
Okay.
Today, the misnomer, the fallacy, the mistake that I hear perpetuated over and over and over is that the seller pays the buyer, and that's just wrong.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just not how it works. Let's go to Contract Law 101. And let's put on your best first day of school attire, Greg. Take your picture. We're going to Contract 101.
Here we go. Pen's ready. Here, I'm going to click it, everybody. Pen's ready. So you heard that.
There we go. And so in a real estate contract, when an agent goes to secure a real estate listing, in that agreement, the seller negotiates with the agent about what the entirety of the commission will be. Okay, so the seller negotiates what the entire amount of commission is they will pay a real estate agent to sell their home. From there, the agent chooses what happens with that allotment of commission. Now, there's some semantics. We could argue the broker has a role in it. They do. I get it. Okay, but the agent / broker decides how they distribute commissions. There are some agents who say, you know what, I'll take half and I'll share half as an incentive to bring a buyer, and a buyer who's represented by an agent. That'll be their incentive. There are some who say, as a listing agent, I'm going to keep 90% and share 10%. I'm going to keep 75, incentivize with 25. There's all these variations of how that's distributed. Sure. Someone could choose 100 and 0. Technically, the answer is it's actually 100 and 0. The seller negotiated directly with an agent to represent them. 100% of the seller's money goes to the seller's agent. The agent makes a independent choice about what they do as a byproduct with that amount they've negotiated.
There we go.
The court didn't necessarily, the jury didn't care about the semantics of that component, and that didn't really enter in, no matter the fact that would have been plenty sufficient enough to have, you would think, sway the way the decisions were made, because it's hard to conspire when every seller has the ability to independently choose. Every agent has the ability to independently choose. If that's the case, no seller was harmed. Nonetheless, you get 8 random people in the state of Missouri who choose the fate, who are not wildly well educated on the process. So that's what we end up with.
Unreal.
Okay, so door number 2 could be buyers unrepresented and seller is the only one represented.
Okay.
That creates some challenges. The challenges would be buyers then would have no one advocating for their best interest.
Got it.
In which case, then what do we think would happen? It's quite possible that a lot of buyers would then be making poor decisions, and or being harmed as a byproduct of having no one advocating for their best interest. I don't think that's what the government wants. A democracy requires property rights. Okay, it is in a democracy there are rights that belong to everyone, and one of those rights is property rights. The other is the right to freedom of speech. The other's, a number of other rights outlined in the Bill of Rights. And so one of the core components is property rights. If we minimize the access and the ability for people to have property, we significantly compromise the stability of democracy. Okay. And so it's my belief that door number 2 is not likely an option either, because it has a negative impact on the state of affairs within the country. Eventually, Congress looks up and goes, this probably isn't good for getting reelected. This probably isn't good for the stability of the ecosystem that is currently the American economy, that is democracy, and so on.
Sure.
It's similar to inflation. It's terrible for those that do not have a substantial amount of assets. It's terrible for reelection. Just look at Joe Biden's poll numbers. And so it's likely not going to be the case for door number 2 is unrepresented buyers for that reason.
Got it.
Here's the challenge with that is that what it creates then is door number 3, 4, and 5. Okay. And so,
all right. Okay.
So the challenge is that buyers, if you believe that buyers need an advocate and buyers need someone to represent them, then you kind of split into a few groups and you say, okay, well, what are the potential ways to solve that problem? Because we believe that today that there's nothing that will cause a seller to sever their relationship with a real estate agent to list their home. Because today, 91% of sellers choose to hire a real estate agent to sell their house because they move once a decade and because they have other shit to do.
Yeah.
Let's just call it nothing else. Right? Like they move, if you're doing it one time a decade and you have other shit to do and you go to work and you rely on experts and you're an American who opts for convenience and expertise, then you're going to hire a real estate agent. Okay. Because
Eric, and not to stop you there, but which is the majority of the population, correct? I mean, I don't
100%. 91% has a choice today.
Yeah.
91% of consumers could go hire a company that would be considered like a discount brokerage, or they could go do it themselves. And yet, very few do. In fact, the largest portion of sales that are for sale by owner are from family member to family member. Okay. Oh. Or from some affiliated contact that they already know, which is like, hey, mom knows Betty and Betty's looking for a house, Greg, and it's just like your house. Why don't you sell it to Betty instead of going through the process?
Yeah. Got it.
Okay. The problem with that method though is it gets you the least amount of fair open market demand. Well said. If you sell off market to Betty, then you and Betty, you're probably going to sell it to Betty at a price that is lower than what you could get in the market. And so most people choose to expose it to the most amount of eyeballs possible. Most choose to hire a real estate agent to do that. There have always been low price to almost no price options in every market for an eternity. Okay. And not a one of them has demonstrated the ability to be profitable and sustainable, by the way, and capture any sizable market share.
And as you mentioned that though, Eric, and I know that a lot of individuals are tuning into this thinking, okay, this, I'm tracking what you're putting down here. I think another thought process that might make sense, even to a market in conditions that have been in the prior, let's say 2 years, right? Yep. Is that 91% still hold true, even though the houses were literally flying? Yeah,
it's wild,
right?
Yeah,
it's still representation.
Yeah, here's what's crazy about it too is that the attorneys in the Sitzer Burnett case chose to portray this as a negative, and I can understand the spin of it. If you're an attorney, your job is not necessarily your job is to portray a version of reality that lines up with a goal, not necessarily what most would perceive to be reality, but it's a version of reality to sync with whatever your end desired outcome is, right? So in this particular case, yes, that what the attorney had indicated, the attorney being Michael Ketchmark, what Ketchmark had indicated was that the internet had disrupted every other industry for the for pricing and fees other than real estate. And that's just not actually a material fact, but let's pretend that it was. Sure. We'll let him off the hook with that misnomer. Okay.
Right. But just a little,
because, all you'd have to do is look at medical, or, you could look at, it hasn't done anything for attorney comp. Nonetheless, AI will replicate most of what's available in case law, but nonetheless, the argument was that the internet has not disrupted real estate agent fees, and it should have. And so what's funny about it though is that is that, yes, more access to information and more transparency is available today in the US home market than ever before. And more people today choose to hire a real estate agent than they did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and so on.
There you go.
And so people make choices to hire a representative today. And then oddly enough, their feedback indicates pretty well that they would make that same hire again.
Okay.
In fact, more than 8 out of 10 people say they would rehire their exact same real estate agent that they just hired. Okay. So 9 out of 10 opt to hire an agent. 8 out of 10 say they would rehire their same agent, which must mean that they were at least satisfied or somewhat satisfied or overly satisfied with the person they hired. Okay. So sellers have choices. They have choices today, and they still indicate that their preferred choice is representation, even in a competitive market where homes sell quickly. And even when they have more access to information than ever before. So inside then of door number 3, we have to then say, okay, well, we believe that sellers will largely still exist in the exact same landscape of choice that they've had since the dawn of time. They could hire for $500, $1, whatever it is, up to hundreds of thousands if they choose. And so sellers will stay the same, but we have to fix this buyer problem. And the buyer problem we have to fix is, how can a buyer hire a real estate agent and pay for one? Because that's the real crux of it. The crux of it is that a buyer, for the most part, this year, the typical buyer put down, first-time buyer puts down 8%. This year was the number higher than usual. And then the repeat buyer is going to put down closer to, that 15 to 20% range. Okay. So if a buyer then had to come up with an additional percentage on top of that, it would prohibit or preclude some buyers or some would-be buyers from actually entering into the marketplace.
Sure.
Well, remember, the goal in America is to actually have property rights. The goal is to actually improve ownership. And so if we believe that people want to improve, the government has an initiative to improve property rights and improve ownership, then that's not a good thing. Because who gets impacted the most? It's largely the disenfranchised, those that are disproportionately negatively impacted, and those that are minorities and underserved communities.
Right.
So that's not a good thing. And quite the opposite, in fact, of what needs to be happening. And so we have to figure out then in door number 3, what are the solutions? Okay. Right. And so there's a handful of solutions then that show up. And those solutions that show up are that it's quite possible that agents will do the work for less.
Okay.
Under one caveat. And the caveat is that with technology, that the work will be able to be facilitated with less work.
Okay. Sure.
Okay.
Human input is what you mean.
That's right. So the amount of time, so right now there's a physical limitation on the amount of sales that an agent can facilitate. Okay. So let me give you some perspective. I was able to sell 128 houses as an individual agent, and that's an insane, stupid amount. Okay. Yeah. Like the estimated kind of thought is that 30 is the threshold of one person's capacity before they would need to start making additional hires. I did about 130. Okay. So that's an alarmingly amount comparative to what the typical norm of capacity is.
Sure.
My wife is able to do in the range, Lauren's able to get somewhere in that 40-ish range, probably 45.
Got it.
You're
saying you were a superhuman. Is that what you're saying?
No.
Are you some kind of cyborg? Are we talking about maybe Terminator 2 or Terminator 3? What is this, Eric? Come on.
Well, I'll tell you, there was she does an incredible job too from a productivity standpoint, from an efficiency standpoint. Here's the biggest difference, Greg, is that the margin between 30 and 130 is willingness to sacrifice other components of your life in exchange for work working more or working with more people. I was willing to compromise most other related components of my life. My wife has a threshold of how much she's willing to work.
Sure.
Then not sacrifice her, her sanity, her health, our child, our marriage, all those other things.
Right.
When I did 3x that, I was okay compromising everything. We were not married, didn't know each other, so it is what it is. But so to give you some perspective, the reason why there's a capacity is because you have to there are physical aspects of the job that today cannot be replaced with technology. And so what Gary said was, and I really liked the way that he contextualized this recently, was the work is the work. Technology has disrupted everything to make it more efficient and more transparent and of higher communication to the buyer and seller, but the work is still the work. As of today, the work is still the work. You still have to show up, talk to people, like research the market. You still have to negotiate. You still have to open doors. You have to drive to houses. You have to go back and let someone in to measure for furniture. You have to go back and talk to them so that they can show it to their family and get rid of their first-time buyer jitters and remorse and regret and all of the other components that come into physically being available. You have to go to the closings. You've got to go through the inspection process, the appraisal process. All of the physical aspects of the job still exist. Until technology can replace some physical aspects of the job, the work will still be the work. In which case, what we know is that door number 3, if it was, then would be is agents will do it for less if technology replaces a portion of the work. However, in door number 4, what you would say is that agents will not do it for less because there is a threshold of what would be considered market equilibrium. Okay, so we get super nerdy. We would say microeconomics 101 tells us that the amount of supply eventually finds a balance to the amount of demand. Okay, and so the amount of real estate agents that are required to perform the work is equal to the amount of dollars distributed for the amount of work.
Okay.
In the middle is this Goldilocks zone. Okay, let's just for fun call it $100 million worth of commission gets distributed to 1 million agents. If you took that number and you did $50 million distributed to 1 million agents, it would change the amount of money that people earned. A portion of that 1 million real estate, of those 1 million real estate agents would say, you know what, F it, I'm done. I'm going to go do something else. I'm going to take pictures of my feet. I'm going to go drive Uber. I'm going to sell something on the Facebook marketplace. I'm doing something different. Now, all of a sudden, that 1 million would drop to having a lower portion of licensed real estate agents. The $50 million stays the same. The agent count goes down, which now means the agents who are left make more money. All of a sudden, they find equilibrium.
Okay.
People will only trade their time for an amount of money they're willing to trade their time for, period.
And Eric, and the way that you mentioned that to me, it thinks of what is it, the Goldilocks and the Three Bears? You said too hot, too cold, just right. And I think that to me is looking at it from a standpoint of cause and effect. Earlier on, when you were talking about door number 3, it put into perspective into my mind the thought process of profitability or lack thereof. I mean, if there is a capability of really saying to yourself, how low can you go and still run and maintain a business, that to me it's a very fine line, depending on who you talk to.
Yep.
And to your other point, as real estate professionals, last property, that sold myself, with a professional. I didn't sell anything. I'm not a licensed realtor. I used a realtor myself, shocker, just like the 91%, as you mentioned, selling my last home. This was 2 years ago, mind you. And 2 years ago, when I had the conversation with this real estate professional, I'm telling you, there was emotional conversations. And what I said to him is I said, gosh, I mean, imagine if you were paid by the hour. I mean, I was calling all hours and then like just chatting, hey, what do you think of this or what's going on here? And I feel like I'm plugged in. I feel like I understand, above and beyond, but I'm still having these things. So the idea is that real estate professional that I personally hired is worth their weight in gold. But I also appreciate and understand the time that's taken and everything that's given. So Eric, what's your thought and perspective about that kind of the sentiment or idea behind lowering commissions to a certain standpoint? Like when does it break the mold? When does it say, look, this just doesn't even make sense as a business?
Listen, the line is actually pretty thin. As someone who looks at real estate financials, really, really commonly, I've only looked at a few hundred of them this year.
The P&L whisperer.
I don't know too many people who look at more of them. So as someone who looks at them, the margin's incredibly thin.
Okay.
And the margin is so thin that a 20% drop in income would cause most to be unprofitable.
There we go.
Or it would at least transfer the industry to individuals instead of teams.
Okay.
And so then what happens is you'd see a quality of service decrease. And then again, the consumer doesn't win there either.
No.
And none of which actually go and solve the problem. So there is a threshold to where profitability in being in business makes no more sense.
Okay.
In which case, then you have to start cutting corners, or you have to start questioning and compromising the process for the consumer. And that makes no sense. Now, crazy. In higher price markets, it's a little different because you can allow your price to cheat somewhat. Okay. And but in the Midwest, there's not much margin. There really isn't. It's a volume-based business, and it's a process and systems oriented business in order to put out a great product and also do it with enough profit to make it worth it.
Right.
Because you could just as easily just go be an individual real estate agent and make enough and work less if that were the case. But the consumer, again, gets a lesser experience.
Yeah. It doesn't help anybody win that way.
Nope. It's the equivalent if you just said, hey, all of a sudden, no publicly traded builders. Sorry, everyone has to be mom and pop handyman builder. There can be no nationally syndicated construction companies. Well, it's a worse product for the marketplace. It increases the probability of market collapse and instability and volatility. It creates issues with insurance and legal recourse and so on. So in door number 4 is, you would say, commissions cause the agent count to go down. Eventually the market would find an equilibrium because some people would say it's not worth doing. They get out of the business. Okay. The other option then is door number 5, which is capitalism shows up and someone comes in with a cape and riding on their white horse, and they say, I'll make money from this lawsuit. Not only should those grubby attorneys be getting abundantly wealthy from these frivolous suits, but we too are going to cash in on this process. And so what we're going to cash in on is we're going to come up with loan products, and we will lobby the government so that they will agree to find solutions for agents to be paid to represent buyers. Why? Because the largest bag holder of mortgage-backed securities and of mortgages happens to be Uncle Sam. What would Uncle Sam like to do to preserve and protect its investment? They would like to have the least amount of risk possible.
There we go.
What would cause more risk is unrepresented buyers. Therefore, if all of a sudden it became illegal for buyer's agents to be paid by a listing agent or after an incentive that somehow passed through a listing agent, then Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the HUD, and the Veterans Association could come along and they could say, you know what, we are going to come up with a product that allows the buyer to still have representation, and that representation can be a part of their mortgage. Okay, they happen to do that today. The government subsidizes loan officers. Loan officers make money. Funny enough, what you don't know, Greg, was how much money your loan officer made when you purchased the home that you're sitting in.
Sure.
The government subsidized them, and you don't know how much they paid them. Now, I realize that someone's going to come along and go, not really, Eric. They got paid based on who they work for and so on. Yeah, I get it. Own a mortgage company. I get it. For all intents and purposes, the end buyer is the government. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the HUD, VA. They back the mortgage. They pay the originator or to service and originate the mortgage by this convoluted process of originating, buying, servicing, and then bundling and selling mortgage-backed securities. Okay, so the government steps in and said, "Hey, we'll have a process for you to pay the loan officers because we believe that it still is a service that's necessary." You could use Rocket Mortgage or one of those other app related mortgage companies where you talk to a robot or something that's at least near quality of a robot. You could do that. Most do not.
Yeah. In
fact, more than almost 90% of consumers rely on their real estate agent to recommend a mortgage company.
Sure.
Okay. And so the government in capitalism, and door number 5, could come along and say, we'll bring out a product to where agents are compensated and they represent buyers, and those buyers can still use government funded, government secured loans through Fannie, Freddie, VA, and HUD. The only ones that wouldn't would be jumbo loans, in which case someone purchasing a jumbo loan typically has more than sufficient either credit or cash to be able to financially hire someone that they would prefer to represent them. Okay, sure. So capitalism solves potentially door number 5, which is how to compensate representation. And then lastly, we could say in door number 6 of the future for the industry is nothing changes.
Okay.
The last one is that gets very little attention is nothing changes. Here's why.
Eric, hold on. Why is that though? Why does door number 6 get the least amount of attention?
Because it's the unsexiest and the uneducated. And so when it's not good for headlines, and it's not good for people who like doom porn. And there are a lot of people.
You saw it all. I mean, I Googled it. I read them. You heard it at the beginning.
People on the internet love them some doom porn. Yeah. And there's this whole trope of people who are in a cult that they're just not aware of. They're in this cult, Greg, and they're in this cult where they've been betting against American capitalism since, Washington traversed the Delaware in the 1700s. They've been betting against the best modern capital market in global history, and they'll continue to lose. But their doom porn addiction is so strong they can't see reality, and so the doom porners. It doesn't make sense that fundamentally nothing might change.
Right.
And because what seems like the least probable outcome, it would be door number 6. And that is that materially, it is my belief that materially very little will fundamentally change.
Okay.
It's my belief that little fundamentally will change because I believe the consumer has already voted and made a decision, and they don't care about the semantics. What they care about is, to your point earlier, which is avoiding the regret framework and ensuring that they make a decision that they're comfortable with, not a decision that is always logical and rational and reasonable.
Yeah.
The best framework I can put this through is that if God forbid one of your loved ones died, a parent, a child, something terrible like that, and you had to, and you were responsible to make all of the arrangements for the funeral and all the arrangements for what happens as a byproduct. funny enough, what we know is that people spend way more money on funerals and on the post death remembrance components than anything is rational or reasonable. The most rational thing to do is just to do the cremation thing, and, find the closest place that you can safely dispose of the ashes and move on after maybe having a lunch over at the Olive Garden. And that would be the actual rational thing to do. What we know is that very few people opt for that method because of regret. And what I mean by that is for some reason, we're so wildly ridiculous that we believe that somehow our dead loved one will come back and haunt us for the decision that we made to not give them the appropriate send-off that they would have wanted. And so we spend tens of thousands of dollars for this to-do and this event and this embalming and this display, this charade of processional, this on display walkthrough, so that we don't regret the decisions that we make in the future.
Eric, it's interesting that you mentioned that too, and I want to stipulate this: don't look behind your shoulder, because I think you got the ghost of the Mona Lisa behind you. But I think ultimately people look at that for a lot of instances in weddings. That's the biggest thing. I'm only going to have one. I don't want to regret it. The logical thing would be to go to the courthouse and be done with it and save, thousands upon, maybe depending on who you talk to, 6 figures worth of for a one day sort of event. It is interesting, but it's FOMO, right? Fear of missing out.
100% of
regret sort of scenario. It's fascinating, and it is an emotional thing. I mean, look, I just take it to the equation, putting myself directly into the consumer's shoes. Selling and purchasing a home is an extreme emotional thing. I mean, under the most normal circumstances.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how is this possibly mitigated under any of the doors that you had mentioned to make sense for the best ultimate outcome? And, I definitely want to dive into that, Eric, because I know you've got so much process and perspective. So, okay, the real estate professional who's tuned into this, they're coming to Disruptance to really hear the truth, kind of getting rid of all the fluff and the noise. What do you say to them, Eric? What do you say to instill into their mind what's going on right now? I know you kind of said your perspective and opinion, where you think it's going to go, but what would you say if I'm that professional? Hey, Eric, what does all this mean? What do I need to put into my mind to have a clear message for myself first? What would you say?
So I'll tell you the thing that the conversation that at least I've, my legal disclaimer here, what the conversation that we'll have in my house. How about that?
Okay. Yeah. Let's do that.
And so I won't give advice. I'll only give you the conversation we have in my house, which is understand how you feel, what you believe, and what your conviction is around cooperative compensation. Have conviction around whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing, whether you recommend it or whether you do not.
Okay.
Whenever you get clear on what your recommendation is, then you can make a recommendation with education and evidence to a seller when you go on an appointment to be hired by the seller. Know how you think and believe about it, be able to communicate it clearly so that you can advocate for your position, whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing. Doesn't matter. That's not my decision. And then next is create a menu of services and a menu of choices, as in a varying degree of options, 1, 2, 3, 5, whatever it is. Provide the customer with choice. Okay. Provide the customer with options so that you can strategically arrive at the best solution for the consumer. We've always done this. Myself, my team, we've always worked with the seller on a strategy around what's in their best interest, believing that there's no one size fits all.
Perfect.
And that some items cost more money, some solutions require more risk, some options arrive at desired outcomes better than others. So have a menu. And then lastly is understand that the lawsuits change nothing today.
Okay.
That the consumer has opted with their feet and their dollars to continue to hire a real estate agent. In fact, 99.7% of sellers chose to offer an incentive to a buyer's agent
Mm-hmm.
in the Northwest MLS, which did away with a requirement for cooperative compensation 4 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
99.7 offered an incentive to work with a buyer's agent. In fact, publicly traded builders who have more data than any seller does, publicly traded builders offer an incentive as well. When the market gets weaker, the incentive goes up. When the market gets stronger, typically the incentive goes down, because microeconomics 101. And so be clear on what you believe about cooperation so you can articulate it. Be clear on your value proposition and then the corresponding menu of services. And then lastly is understand that the consumer has already made a choice. The consumer has chosen with their money and their feet to hire professionals.
Okay, and Eric, the fact that you broke that down, despite all the articles that are out there and all the naysaying and the fear mongering, the wet blankets is like what I like to call them out there. This is true nature into it. So, what would be that? The question that I'm going to ask you now, Eric, which I think it almost answers itself. Does the consumer care about what we're talking about here right now? Do they even know?
No.
Or do you know what I'm saying? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the consumer doesn't care. The consumer doesn't care today anymore about a class action suit for realtors than they do about the class action suit for property and casualty insurance, than they do for automotive insurance that's going on right now. The class action suits around baby powder, around jewels, around a number of other aspects. Oh, there was a class action lawsuit with Facebook recently. They don't care about the class action lawsuits as it pertains to TCPA.
Mm-hmm.
Consumers have lives, just like you and I do.
Yep.
And what they care about are the things that impact their livelihood and their life. And that's not what a group of real estate agents are doing. As a byproduct, the consumer doesn't care. Greg, are you familiar with the class action suits in the insurance industry right now?
No.
Why would you be? The only reason you would choose to be is if somehow they impacted you, or if you're a psycho like me and you just happen to research it to make a point. Yeah. And so the consumer doesn't care anymore about the insurance class actions than they do for the agent. If they did, they would be lobbying Washington for the last century, and they just haven't.
But Eric, I'm glad you mentioned that. And again, to me, it's interesting the few impacts into my life, and maybe this is just me being sheltered. I remember when there was lawsuits against McDonald's for hot coffee being spilled and for something to do with overly hot food to toddlers. To me, that impacted me for a moment because I go to McDonald's every once in a while. But again, we're talking about completely different avenues into life, and that's where I think it gets muddied up. People think, oh my gosh, look at all that's happening. Look, if you're a real estate professional, you're going to know what's happening into your field and your world. Yep. But if you're not, and you're transacting a few times throughout your life, you are not going to be as involved into this. So this takes me to my next question to you, though, Eric, which I think is very clarifying for anybody who's tuning into this. What would you say to the professional who's tuning in when they're looking to have a rebuttal? Let's hypothetically say that somebody is looking to sell or buy, and they happen to throw something into Google or see a headline on their favorite social platform. Yeah. And they know very little, but they ask, hey, what's up with these lawsuits and commissions? What would you say to the realtor, real estate professional tuning in now, to then educate the consumer? What would that look like?
Yeah. What I wouldn't do is spend a lot of time laboring over it and trying to convince or sway the consumer. You just don't get anywhere trying to change someone's mind for the most part. And so, the thing that I would probably go with is that, today commissions are being challenged as a policy, not as a practice.
Okay.
Commissions are being challenged as a policy, not as a practice. Okay. There is currently class action litigation going on around the policy regarding how realtors share or distribute or advertise commissions. today there is no lawsuit going on around whether or not a commission, an incentive to a real estate agent is or is not legal.
Mm-hmm.
It's purely based on policy alone.
Love it. Love it. Keep it short and sweet, very simple. And again,
that's what it's about.
But Eric, if there's pushback on that, say, at the end of the day, this is how the compensation structure works. This is how you run a business, how you feed your family, how you support your goals and livelihood is based off of the commission structure. So having the conversation with a buyer and or seller, into that realm, I think is important to kind of at least have some kind of game plan, not to be blindsided if there is a very, very small percentage of individuals who might even approach you as a real estate professional with this information. I think it is important, and maybe this goes full circle into it. You should keep your finger on the pulse, what's going on in your business and in your world. And, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, I think you need to know both sides of the equation before you can actually, have an intelligent conversation, with the end user, which is your client. But I really appreciate that where you're coming from, Eric. So what do you think, what's next? What's next for the agent, the consumer? What's the future kind of look like? I mean, is it wrapped up into door number 6? I mean, what are your what would you close everything and wrap everything up with here too?
Yeah, I mean, the good news is it's right as of today, nothing is fundamentally or materially changed other than potentially the act of additional disclosure or the additional conversation. And even that's not necessarily clear. There, to my knowledge, has been no formal ruling. In fact, it's been indicated that that won't take place until potentially the end of Q1 of 2024. And that doesn't take into account what is likely to be an impending appeal of the litigation. Okay. And so it's quite likely that those lawsuits will be, or that one lawsuit in Missouri will be appealed, because I believe that it has a far-reaching challenge on a number of other industries, not necessarily just real estate alone, and so creates a lot of case law confusion, in my opinion. Okay. However, in the interim, what I would say is that the job is still the job. The work is still the work. The work is still talking to people who have a problem to solve in real estate. It is talking to people who've had a life event, who need to change their environment or want to change their environment, either to solve a problem that exists today in their life or to get to a perceived superior future. Consumers still go on living their life every single day. Life events happen. People get divorced, they die, they get diapers. There are a number of life events that take place. Those people with those life events still need help by having someone who's supporting their lifestyle and their life. That just happens to be the actual job of a real estate agent. The real estate agent's job did not change, period. And it won't change tomorrow. It won't change in Q1. People will still need help. They'll still hire professionals to help them go through those life events no differently than they will during someone's death or during someone's dismemberment or all the other varying ways in which people hire outside support for the complexities and challenges that are unforeseen in life. Real estate agents will be no different.
Well said, Eric. And again, a great way to cap this episode off. I mean, to me, I think it's super insightful, looking at it from a true, honest perspective into that. And again, I love the candid nature as always, Eric. I mean, it's just coming from somebody who's a true practitioner. Last question into this. I know we're going to wrap this one up, but we read off a bunch, at least earlier today. I mean, you're constantly researching and learning and growing, Eric. You're one of the most versed professionals that are out there into the market, period. Where do you tend to gravitate towards to kind of stay on top? I know there's so many different sources, but I mean, is it internal to your team, to brokerage? Is it external specific news outlets that you personally trust? Or is it, hey, you kind of consume everything and you find the one side and the other and the truth in the middle, as you usually say?
And it's so funny. Lauren and I were talking about it this morning. I learned this concept. I'm still unaware of if this is a legitimate thing or not, but the concept of like dyslexic thinking and, dyslexic thought or dyslexic reading would be, and writing would be where you invert letters or potentially words, and dyslexic thinking is similar in that you don't think linearly. You in fact actually aggregate lots of information, and then you triangulate all of that information into a rational and reasonable thought. And that's actually really how my brain works, which is I look for patterns, and then I associate meaning to numbers, and look for the numbers and the meaning that contradict each other. And then go attempt to either validate or invalidate one of them. So, for instance, I would take then say, Housing Wire has had a lot of research on. There was like a 90-some page study on commissions, and so when you go through that study of commissions, there are a lot of well articulated hypothesis about real estate commissions.
Sure.
However, some of those conflict with the way that consumer behavior data and research also happens to line up. And so I go look for the outliers, the things that don't add up, and then go try to validate them in real life. Housing Wire, like I said, has good content. That's typically my go-to like news source. So I'm going to look at real estate news itself. Every week on Monday, I do a hour-long market and economics event called, so creatively named, Market Monday.
Well, there we go.
where I take all of this week's real estate and economic data, and Elise and I ingest it, and then we put it out into an hour-long interactive training and market update content. So every single week, I'm having to create content of real estate news, and I will tell you, not that much changes from week to week. Yeah, and so when you're trying to put out a highly attended weekly event about real estate insights and market data, you have to find as many sources as humanly possible and aggregate it in order to get people to keep showing up. So Market Monday, that's the best place to be.
Well, and I love it. And that's open to the public, right? I mean, as far as...
It's not, but someone can DM me and I will get them. We'll get them access.
Okay. So you heard it, everybody. DM Eric, check out any of the channels.
They've lasted an entire hour, Greg, of like me ranting about this commission suit. So they deserve it.
That's right. There's something. There's always the pot of gold at the end of this rainbow, folks, when it comes to disruptors. So this is great, Eric. I appreciate it. And again, diving deep. And I think that talking about the way that you research and your thought process and kind of really finding the truth into so much noise is kind of the needle in the haystack. I'd love to have an episode just on that. So I think we'll kind of pin that into the future. But any other final words before we wrap this one up, Eric?
Keep going out solving problems. That's actually what being an entrepreneur is. The world will pay you for the problems that you solve for it.